And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 221. Today is a feedback session. So we've had 3 people send in images and we're going to take a little bit of look at them and decide, look for ways in which they could be improved or overcome particular difficulties they've been up against. So we happen to be here live on YouTube. If you're watching us live at any rate, stick your name down below, say hello, and we'll make a start. So yes, welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. So today is a feedback session. So April, Nurije and Nadia have each sent in images, and all 3 slightly different ones, and we're going to take a little look at ways which is they could be improved through the editing or overcome points where they've been sort of kind of feeling a little bit stuck or not quite sure what to do next. So yes, if you are watching the recorded version of this, then you can always leave a comment, although I won't be able to respond immediately, of course. But if you are watching live, then yes, leave a comment down below. Let me know who you are, where you are, what the weather's doing. Join in the chat with everybody else. You've actually seen this chat already underway. So we start off with Rebecca says, "Hi everyone from a wet and windy air. I'm warming up with some of my mum's red pepper and chilli soup." Oh, that's a great way to warm up. Red pepper and chilli soup sounds fantastic. Janet says, "Hello from a chilly Mississauga in Canada." April joins us from a cold and sunny Long Island, New York. Nadia says, "Hi from a very windy Fife." Susan says, "Hi from a grey and drizzly Kakubri, clutching my hot chocolate." Has hot chocolate become a Sunday special to watch the to sup while you're watching the podcast then, Susan? Certainly the grey and drizzly is the right kind of weather for hot chocolate. Mind you, actually, to be honest, I think any kind of weather is the right weather for hot chocolate. Robert joins us from Texas and says, "Howdy all." Meg says, "Good afternoon, everyone." And Marilyn joins us, says, "Hi, everyone," from a sunny Colorado. Oh, Robert says, it's from a foggy North Texas. Fog. Oh, you can get some good photos in fog. Susan says, "Yes, indeed. Can't beat a hot chocolate." And April says she loves hot chocolate. Excellent. Okay, so we have people, we have pictures, we have a podcast to start. So before we make a start, a quick update on the Smug Points Leaderboard. So rather than specifically pinning down December only, we're doing the year-long leaderboard. So for 2024, VG is still out ahead with 645 Smug Points. Robert is second with 560, April with 550, and Susan with 505. Everybody else is, I think, is just under 500 or below, and as such probably doesn't stand too much of a chance of being the overall winner. However, it's still kind of still worth taking part and contributing to the Smug Points. Now, we've been doing the Smug Points since the beginning of the year. You get Smug Points for contributions to the podcast, where you get, whether it's submitting for feedback sessions like today, April, Nadia and Nurije will all get a bonus 25 Smug Points for submitting their images for feedback. You get 5 points just for turning up, saying hello and leaving a comment. You get 10 points if you enter a challenge, and there, of course, there's a top 3 positions for any challenge that we do where you get bonus 30, 20 and 10. So there are still outside chances here because there's 2 challenges to come. Next week we have the After Dark challenge. Then we have the seasonal food challenge. So I'll remind you of those at the end of the podcast. So plenty to play for and have fun. But if you have any ideas of how we might tweak or add to or adjust the Smug Points for next year, then I'm all ears. This whole podcast is for you. The Smug Points are an extra layer of fun to add into that, and I'm welcome to ideas and thoughts about how we can adjust and tweak and grow and develop these podcasts, whether it's Smug Points or actually anything else. Let me know. Send me an email. Leave a comment in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook page. Get a chat going. All ideas, brainstorm it a bit. Let's see how this. I've been running these podcasts now for well over 4.5 years. They are changing bit by bit. There's room to go wherever we want. So put your thinking caps on and see what ideas you might come up with to develop these podcasts. Right, okay, so where are we now? Well, let's make a start then. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with April. Now, April sent in this image and she said, here's a feedback picture for you. How can I get rid of the rippled water without ruining the picture? Also, any improvements will do, thank you. Now, when you say the rippled water, I'm assuming you're not meaning absolutely every bit of ripple on here, because part of the reflection of the birds in the water, where we've got the kind of yellows and whites on the beak kind of coming down here against the reds, which I presume are well, I don't know what's causing the reds. There might be a big red barn, or it might be red leaves taken during fall a month or two ago. But these reflections are really quite cool. I'm guessing what you're really meaning, April, is the sort of more this line of kind of patchy blue reflections up here, which do feel like they're distracting a little bit. So how to get rid of these without ruining the picture? Now, a lot of this kind of comes down to the editing software that you happen to have. If you've got Photoshop, these days it's actually very easy. If I just open this with Photoshop here. But first of all, I'll tell you what, before we get to that, let's just get this crop right. Because it does feel like the birds here are kind of up and to the left of where we would maybe ideally want them. I think if you've got, remember this notion of positioning within the frame of the image, which is, in an ideal world, if you've got something moving forward, unless there's a really good reason not to, you kind of want to have more space in front of them than you do behind. There's also a sense of it feeling fairly close to the top here with more space underneath. So I would have been tempted to have it sort of maybe the slightly more like that as a positioning on a post, maybe sort of somewhere, something perhaps like that. Now what I will do is, just so we can see what it would look like, is I will go to Generative Expand, use Photoshop's Generative Expand. Obviously I wasn't there to take the photo. I don't know what was to the left. Maybe the reflections all changed at that point. So there's no real way of me knowing whether this particular version of the photo would have been possible. But you can see here, I think, that it kind of feels like there's a little bit more space to play with. Maybe there's just a bit too much red at that point. Maybe we just kind of come down, something like that. And I think that feels like this is a little bit more comfortable area. What it's done, though, is this has also extended out this little patch of blue that you were concerned about. Now, the easy way in Photoshop these days is you quite simply get your little tool here, which is, if I hover that over there, the selection brush tool. And what we can do is we select any little patches of blue or indeed any patches that we're not overly keen on. And now we have to be careful that we don't actually necessarily completely run over the head of the, now I was going to say ducks. They're not ducks, are they? Are they cormorants? Not totally sure. If you can remember what they were, April, just leave a note in the comments there and I'll take a little look. Now, having done this little selection here, I'll just come into there, get rid of that paler blue. All I really then need to do is I go to the generative fill and hit generate, leaving it blank. Because at this point, what it's going to do is the AI algorithms and all the rest of it are going to work out what the rest of the picture is like and just sort of slot in order. Yeah, there you go. So we've now removed those bits and now it's left a blue chunk there. If I take in that, that's now made it look more like the tail under the water there. That version, maybe. Actually, no, I think that one, and it's given us 3 versions. If I wanted another, I could hit generate again. Now we've done that, I think that kind of gives you really what it was you were looking for. Makes it fairly straightforward, and these days, as I say, that kind of is almost about as good as you can hope for. At this point, if you wanted, well, I've selected all these, put this onto a separate layer, you could then go in and potentially you could say, just give it a little bit of a vignette if you wanted to play around with the colours or brighten it or darken it, you've then got those kind of options. Bring up the shadows, play with the contrast a little bit, you know, play with the clarity a touch, texture, anything like that. And then it just kind of boosts the picture a little bit. So that's kind of your easy start point. If you don't have the AI level of, let's just shove that into a group there. So we go back to the original. Actually, I'll tell you what, let's not do that. Let's go to here and put those ones into a group. So I can just remove those for a moment, and we'll take that and put that onto a separate. Now, if you don't have that, there are most editing software, if you have, has some kind of clone tool, in which case what you're wanting to do is maybe where you can select part of the image and then overlay it on another part. So in that case, what you might do is, now you've got to be slightly careful here, because understand that because of the distance between, you know, where the photo's taken, your key sharp point is kind of in the middle with the birds. It's slightly sharper here, it's slightly blurrier in the background, and as we're going to be overlaying, we've got to be kind of careful that we don't grab the wrong piece. If we grab from too far away, it's going to look unnatural. So you want to grab from fairly close. So something like here, you grab so we select that point, and then we can just, hold on one sec, we need to adjust that to normal, and you see I can just start essentially painting over the top, having selected from another part of the picture. And if you make sure that you're selecting sort of more or less directly above, then it's going to kind of fit in with the rest of it. But you don't want to be, like I say, too far away. And you've also got to be slightly careful that because some of these patterns are quite repeating. Now, in a way, because it's ripples, you can get away with that to a degree. But sometimes it will become just a little bit too obvious that it's repeating, and the pattern won't seem quite so good. So I'll just stop on that top bit for the moment. We'll leave that little bit there. But if you feel that, well, okay, actually that's looking like slightly too repetitive, what you can do just subtly is if we reduce the opacity to say 52%, so half the amount of opacity, and then actually from slightly under, we were going from above, slightly under, I press, and then I just kind of softly go over the top, then that sort of brings back in some of the bottom, and it just sort of softens up places like here where you've got to be careful then about repeating the beak, obviously, but it just allows to kind of take the edge off and create almost like a little transition space between the above and below that line. And from that point there, I think you've kind of got what you want. And then if you want to repeat the editing process we just did, you've got that. So difference then between, this was where we used the generative fill, this was where we used the cloning tool. So part of it is, it doesn't look, a lot comes down to the picture you've got. In this case, I think we can just about get away with it with the cloning tool if you're not playing around with something which is creating the generative fill for you. So I hope that all makes sense to you, April. A lovely photo. I really do love the reds in that, and the bird sitting against it. We tend to think of water as being blue, and so to have that really strong red makes us look and then look again. It's very eye-catching, and I would imagine in something like Guru Shots or ViewBug, where people are doing high-speed scrolling, an image like that is likely to grab the attention quite well. All right, okay, so thank you very much for sending that one in, April. More comments. What have we got? Oh, Robert says, I think we might head out into this fog. April says, cool, Robert. And no, this is the white water. Red leaves. Okay, red leaves was what it was reflecting. Meg says, I really like the reflections of the ducks in the water. Becca says, interesting image, love the red colour reflected in the water. April says, yes, cormorants. And she prefers, says, that's much better. And Marilyn says, nice shot and good catch, April. And then April's thanking various people for their nice comments. Oh, and a thank you, Kim, too. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, April. I hope that all helps out. Right, what we'll do now then is we'll move on to Nadia, which is another water photo, in fact. And Nadia Now, she sent me a couple of photos. Now, to be honest, well, not a couple, it's one photo, a couple of versions of. She says, Nadia says, I bit the bullet and bought a year's subscription to Photoshop in the Amazon Black Friday sale to see how I get on with the software. Here's my first test. I did a crop as I felt the leaves were distracting, and then I used the remove tool to take out the last of the leaves from the ripples in the boat's reflection on the water. Then I played around with the... Then I played about to brighten the image to reflect the bright sunny day as it was when the image was taken. So let me show you, essentially this is the original image and then this was her first edit. And she would like to know my thoughts on it. But then actually she came back to me a couple of days later and gave me another edit, which was this, which was a little bit more subtle. And I think when you compare it side by side, this one does feel kind of, it's a bit screaming at you a little bit. This is maybe being shifted too far over into the yellows and brightened. This feels a bit more subtle with it. Now, so where do we go with something like this? So if we go back to in fact, actually what Nadia also did was Nadia sent me the raw file as well. So what we can do is play around with the raw file. So I'll just close those cormorants from April. And I'll click into here. So here we can see the raw file isn't as lifted. Now, what I was going to say here, Nadia, is when you are playing with Photoshop, if you're just kind of really getting into Photoshop now, part of the problem is it's a massive program with so many different things to do that it can sometimes feel completely overwhelming. By and large, I would say the idea is to sort of pick something, pick little bits. You don't necessarily feel like you've got to learn every single tool all at once. Find an image, start playing with it, see what you can do to improve it. And bit by playing with it, you may find that you start getting the hang of it. Having said that, a lot depends on you personally and your way of operating. Now I have to be careful here because my style of operating, my way of learning is to dive in and play, and then if I get completely stuck, then I go and look up instructions or I go and look up YouTube videos of how somebody else has done something and get the step by step. But I tend to be one of those get in and do it and then only check the instructions when I can't get any further. But there's another photographer I know who he is the kind of person who will read the entire manual before he opens the box or gets out the equipment or whatever. So it's a different way of doing it. So a lot of this kind of depends on your brain wiring and how you learn best. Two things that I would say that will make a huge amount of difference when learning Photoshop is masking and getting to grips with, at the very least, the basic levels of camera raw. Because playing around with sliders makes things easy. So if we take something like this, before we get to the crop, they're up here, there's a little auto button. In fact, let's just move that over there so you can see what's going on. I'll just bring that slightly so I'm not sitting in front of it. So you've got your camera raw here, and up in the top right here, there's an auto. And if I click auto, what it's done is automatically brightened everything. Now it has brightened everything, except for the fact that it doesn't necessarily do quite what I want it to. In a way, it's kind of now feeling almost slightly overcooked. The other thing is while it's brightened everything, we've now lost a whole pile of detail on this plank of wood. See, if I take the auto off, there's actually a little bit of detail in there, which is quite nice. But if you hit auto, it has in fact blown it out. So sometimes auto is great, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes then you can go in and you can manually play around. So the first section is the light section, and you have exposure, you can get brightened down and all that kind of stuff. Now we might want to brighten it up a bit, but this is where we start to lose definition in the highlights. But then if you grab the highlights and you pull that down, you see it brings some of that detail back in again. Now where are we? That's it. So the highlights bit, you can sometimes draw more detail back out of the highlights. Similarly, there's things you can do with the shadows where you see how much more detail you start to get out of the shadows if you do that. But if you go too far with it, then, you know, we bring all the shadows up, it's maybe starting to then lose a bit of contrast. But then, of course, you can add contrast as well. But when you add contrast, it tends to oversaturate things as well. So part of what you want to do, I find, well, the work method that I find best is if I just take this back to normal, and what I do is I will, generally speaking, bring a bit up out of the shadows, bring a little bit out of the highlights. Maybe I'll nudge that up a little bit just here, just to kind of get a working starting place, so that I can now open this and actually then really get to see where I want to play around with. What also happens sometimes is it can sometimes over sharpen. Double check when you go to detail as a sharpening, it defaults to a sharpness of 40. Sometimes your luminance can get rid of a little bit of noise, but given the fact that this is a bright sunny day, you've got an ISO 100, luminance should be fine. But when we've got something like that, I will open that. Now that I've got this, I will crop it to how I want it. And so we'll do, I think yours was something like that. Is that, yeah, horizon's more or less straight. So we'll go with that. We'll just play around. So now we have the boat. So now what we're at, the process for this then is to go, well, what's the key narrative? What's the key story of this? The key part of this is the boat. It's the boat in the water. And it's the boat which is drawing our attention. We want our attention drawn to the boat. We know there's trees in the background. The trees are a bit part player. They are part of the scenery. They don't have to be grabbing all our attention. And part of the problem when we went back with the original kind of, and it brightened everything, it also brightened up those trees in the background, which we don't necessarily need to the same degree. Now, if you're trying to draw your attention to a specific area, there's a bunch of ways you can do it. We can play with vignetting and sort of draw the eye in a bit. We can lighten areas. We can darken areas. We can sharpen and blur areas as well. So this is where, but we're not wanting to do probably the same treatment on every single pixel in the picture. And this is where the masking comes in. So we have over here, we have our background layer. Now, if I hold down Ctrl and J, or I think that would be Command and J if you're using a Mac, what that does, or you can just duplicate layer, or layer, duplicate layer. There's about, part of the tricky thing with Photoshop is there's about 6 ways to do anything. But my quick way of duplicating the layer is just to hold down Control or Command and J. So now I have a second layer. So now what I could do is I could go back into Camera Raw, and maybe what I want to do is, now there's an interesting thing here. We might or might not want to do it, which is called lens blur. Now I'll click apply on this. And this is again playing around with the AI. It's part of the advantage of having something like Photoshop, which you're paying a subscription to. It's a more costly program than some others, but it gives you huge variety of things to do. And what this has done here is we can see there's a focal range point, and it's made the background out of focus. So we can see now that the trees are out of focus. If I take that off, you can see we've gone from in focus to out of focus, but we've got the boat in focus. Now, so what it's doing is it's worked out that the boat is the key thing here. But what we can also do is we can move this backwards and forward. Now, if you pull it to the front, what we find is it keeps more of this in focus. The boat has gone out. I can slide this over to the back, and now the trees are in focus, but the boat isn't. Its default was somewhere around here, so that's fine. We can do that. And we can change the amount of blur that we want to make it look very blurred. That tends to kind of make it look much more like a phone photo, to be honest, because that adds extra unnatural blur. We can take the blur completely off. So you can play around to the degree to which you want it. Let's just say, we'll just have it sitting there for a moment. Also be aware though that sometimes it doesn't always get the blur exactly right in every place. And like for example, there's sort of funny little bits going on with the edging of the boat here. What you can do at that point is you can go down here and you can play around with there's usually ways of sort of, you can add brushes and sort of take bits off. But for the moment, what we'll do is we'll just do that, and then I click OK, and what we can see then is the difference between. So by blurring out the background a little bit, it draws our attention back to the boat. That becomes just part of it. Now, another thing we could do, for example, is just straightforwardly grab the curves. Take the curves. Maybe what we want to do is darken the background a little bit. So if I pull this down, that kind of makes things slightly more interesting. The boat's getting maybe a little bit too dark, and this is the mask bit. So we see over here, we've got the curves. This is allowing us to play with this, but it's also got a built-in mask. Now, wherever is white, white is that what's happening is that layer is being applied. But what we can do is if I go to the brush and I turn that to black, then I can remove, essentially it's like sort of rubbing out where that bit of mask is. So if I start playing on that, sorry, I can change, so put that up to 100%. You see, I can go back to the original and I can select where that's going to go. But what I can also do is I don't have to have my brush at 100%. If I put my brush to say to 50%, and then I can kind of gently bring in just this part if I want. Maybe I could even take that down to 17 or something like that and make my brush a bit larger and gently feather out so that you're not ending up with a hard line. Because sometimes when you vignette, hard lines kind of, you then end up drawing too much attention to where it's darker, which you don't really want to do. Good editing, you shouldn't be noticing the editing. You should just be looking at the photo and thinking, that's a nice photo. So you can see then that here, by doing this, we're now drawing more attention in towards the boat. Now, the next thing you identify, what I will do also, if I hold down my Ctrl, Shift and A, that's a select, no, sorry, not one. What is it I do? So I do this automatically. Is it Ctrl, Alt, A? No. So, one sec. Oh no, yeah, Control, Shift and C. And Control, Shift and C copies all the layers together, and then Control and V. Oh, okay. Hold on a sec. No. You know, suddenly I've forgotten what I do. This is ridiculous. No. I do this so automatically that now I've stopped to think about it. It's not working. Okay, if I merge layers, merge visible, convert smart object. Okay, forget all that. Nope. Nope. Select all. Ah yes, that's what I do. Select all and then copy and paste. Right. Mind mess. Okay, right. I've basically copied all these onto a layer now. So we've now got a separate layer, which has got all these ones below merged into. So that allows me to sort of stop and play with it again. So now if I maybe go back to filter, camera raw filter, what I might do is even actually add a little bit more of a vignette, possibly. What I might do as well is decide that I'm going to, right now, it is quite dark here. We can see if we look at the histogram, there's not a lot going over on the right. And so we want to kind of, do we want to, let's hit auto again. It's maybe just looking a bit too, because what it's doing is it's really shoving the whites up, which I'm not so keen on. It's bringing a lot out of the shadows. You kind of, sometimes you can hit auto and play around with it a little bit as well. Okay, so I've brightened it a little bit here. We are also running into this place whereby we're potentially losing some of that. I'll tell you what, let's go to the levels. Yeah, we can just drag this up a little bit like that. And that's brighter, grabs the attention a bit more, except we've lost that patch of white over there. So again, if we go back to make sure that's black, we'll shove that back up to 100%. And maybe slightly more selectively, just reduce the size of the brush there. I can go back in and paint out that levels boost on there and get a little bit more detail coming back. what I might also decide to do is add a little bit, if I paste all that up onto here again, if I go to camera raw filter and then actually use, in the effects part, boost the texture a little bit and the clarity. And that's going to kind of really boost the detail. But again, I don't want it on everything because it's now kind of crunching up. So if I hold down my, now if I hold down the Alt key and press the mask, that gets rid of everything. Now I can just paint in using the white where I want to go. So if I just paint back in now, hang on a sec, what's going on? Is this doing it? Yes, add layer mask. Something's, right, okay, sorry, I'm painting on the wrong part here. See, if I paint that back in on the trees, it gets a bit nasty. But what I'm trying to do though is I only want to do this little bit of extra texture here on the boat itself, because that's the bit. So in a way, it's kind of like sharpening or adding a little bit of contrast to the boat, and maybe there's a little bit of reflection just in front of it. And so by doing this, we're now really drawing in attention to the boat. So essentially what we're doing is by trying to, the key things we're doing here is we're using the kind of sharpen texture, we're using lighten and darken, and we're using blurring as well, all to take our image and draw it into here. Now, if at this point we then feel also that these little bits in the foreground are getting into play where we don't want them, then we can bring back in the select tool like you did earlier and maybe just get rid of those. And then if I hit generative fill, generate, then what that will do is that will replace it with the water around it, and as usual tends to give us 3 options to play with. And there we go, that looks fine. So we'll do something like that one. I think it looks okay. So now if we, just to kind of show you what we've done since the beginning, if I group all those together and then we go, what we've done is we've gone from this to this. And mostly then, and some of this is more noticeable when we kind of zoom in as well. So what we've been doing then is drawing attention, more attention to the boat by blurring the background, by lightening up, by making it sharper or more textured. So this is kind of your starting point. This is where I would start with on your boat, on your editing with something like this. The first thing is always, what's the key thing I'm trying to get across? And in this case, it's the boat in the water and the fact that it's a ruined wreck of a boat. It's the texture, it's the peeling paint. But if the picture gets too busy with the trees in the background, light reflecting too far, then it sort of defeats it. So what we're trying to do is draw our attention in towards the boat. So I hope that all makes sense. I kind of feel like I'm really talking around the subject rather than being clear with it. But I'm hoping that that all makes a bit of sense to you, Nadia. I'm aware I didn't sleep particularly last night, and when that happens, I tend to talk around the point because I find it more difficult to find exactly the right word that I'm wanting. Forgive me for that. Right, a couple of comments here. Susan says she recognises that boat, Nadia. Yes, Nadia did say to me that this was a photo she took when she came down to Kakubri, and I think met up with you, Susan. April says, I like the third one, very nice. Nadia says, thought you would, Susan. Becca says, I'm definitely a read the manual first type of person. Absolutely, and that's great. And it's good for you to know. It's a really important part for you to know how you best operate and best learn. Becca says, I love the worn textures on the boat. Nadia says, I'm like you, Kim, reading manuals doesn't sink in or make sense with me. Meg says, I really like the diagonal length of the boat in the water. And Susan says, this is one of the best lessons of Photoshop I've seen. Thanks, Kim. Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad that's working for you, Susan. Good. Excellent. Right. Oh, okay. So quick breather then. And a little reminder, really, that if you're finding these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining even, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, don't forget to invite your friends. And while you're at it, of course, as well, please go and click the like on this video down below. That always helps the algorithms. And if you haven't done so already, then please subscribe too. And click the little notification bell to be reminded of when future videos turn up. Oh, Fiji's just joined us. Hello, Fiji. Glad you could make it. Fiji's from India in Chennai. Right, okay. So what we will do now is we will move on to Nurije's photo. So let me just find that and pull this up. So, no, not that one. That one. There we go. So this is Nurije's photo, and Nurije basically said any feedback on this would be greatly appreciated. I will say that I saw Nurije use this one on Guru Shots, I think, and immediately as soon as I saw it, I thought that's a lovely photo. I really like this one. These use the lens ball can be quite an interesting little thing, device. I've seen it used various times, and sometimes they're overused, sometimes they're used in ways where you think, okay, you're just using it because it's a lens ball, but it isn't necessarily adding anything to the picture. But I really like the use of this. The autumn fall colours. We've got the brown leaves, but we've also got the yellow in the background as well. We've got the fallen leaves on the ground. This is sitting nicely in a little moss-covered lump of wood, a little probably remains of a tree trunk at some point, with a little brown leaf, a few brown leaves at the back, and it's got a really nice feel to it. And for the photo, when you get to this point, you think, yes, this is a nice photo. But given that I saw this on Guru Shots, my immediate thought was the fact that where it would work better in Guru Shots is if we enhanced a little bit, played around with the light and the dark primarily. So if I open that in Photoshop, let's come into here. I'll just close down that one of Nadia's. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to check the histogram. So I'm going to go to my levels, and what we see here, over here, is everything's bunched up into the shadows. And that if you bring this up a little bit like this, you can see it immediately starts to give it a bit of a boost. It kind of grabs the attention a little bit more. And when we're talking about something like Guru Shots, ViewBug, Photo Crowd, sometimes when people are understanding how the image is going to be seen, and there's a difference between if it's going to be seen in a camera club where a judge is maybe going to be taking several seconds to look at it and judge it, and that's time to really pause and consider the image, or an image on one of these crowd voting sites where people are scrolling at high speed on their device, just going click, 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 and you are lucky if they spend half a second, maybe a quarter of a second on their image to make a decision to whether you get the vote or you don't before they've moved on to the next one. Then you kind of need to make your pictures a little punchier with that. Now, as soon as we've done this, we've made it brighter. That's good, except for the fact that also we've blown the highlights, which is maybe not too bad. And it's also made it brighten up across the whole picture. But the fact that we can see that there's potential for that, I think this is quite often a good place to start. One of the things I was talking before about the notion of tonal range. So we can grab that and we can take a look. Now we could at this point just mask in and play around with, take out the highlights. But what I want to really do with this is I want to be more selective with it. So I will Ctrl J, duplicate the layer. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Camera Raw. If I hit Auto, see what happens. That's brightened it again, but maybe not quite in the way that I want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the light. I'm going to brighten it a little bit here. I'm going to pull those highlights down a little bit as well, because I don't want to blow, I don't want it all being too white down in this part here. Bring the shadows up a bit. Take the optics, give it a little bit more. Now I'm going to give it a bit more of a vignette because we really do want to draw the eye into this part here. The edges are less important. And then what so yes, that's what I'm going to do to begin with. Then I'm going to click my OK. Now this isn't finished yet. Now what I want to do is I'm going to do the dodge and burn. Now dodge and burn allows us to highlight, or so we can highlight, brighten the highlights or darken down the shadows, or we can do it the other way around. Now, what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to go to the dodge, which lightens a selective area, and I have the option for brightening up the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights. Now, the highlights, if I try and brighten the highlights, will basically just end up making everything white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the midtones. I've got this set at only something like 6%, and then this allows me a bit more control. So if I just make this slightly larger, and what I'm going to do is this patch of leaves in here, I'm just going to subtly start running over there. And you can see that what we're doing is we're brightening up the leaves. I'm also going to, now I'm going to try and be careful and not hit the white patch because that will make it too white. But I also want to grab some of these yellows because these yellows are really beautiful in the trees here. Also maybe a little bit of those greens, something like that. And then the yellow in the background I really like. So I'm just going to highlight that a little bit and some of these little bits of orange over here. And so I'm selectively just grabbing a couple of little patches around. Maybe we could even do a little bit perhaps with the leaves here. But then I'm also going to contrast that. I'm now going to go to the burn tool, and the burn tool makes things darker. Once again, I can go shadow, I can darken the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights, but now I'm going to darken the shadows. No point in darkening the midtones because we've just spent time lightening that up. But I've got this down at 4% because the darkening I tend to find gets dark too quickly. So if I just very lightly now run over these, especially the lighter patches, then it sort of is creating a richer definition. I can go back over that yellow over there and maybe a little bit into the highlights of the wood and the leaf. Now, just to show you briefly then, we've gone from that to that. And you can see how much this is really kind of making this stand out. Might have gone slightly overdone the leaves in here, but that's okay for the moment. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to Ctrl and J, copy that one again. Now, if you really want, you can play around with smart filters and do everything in the one go. I quite like having separate layers, which I can go back to. And if I go to Camera Raw filter again, now what I'm going to do is, like we did with the boat, I'm going to play around with the texture and effects, but keep it, and then I'll mask them back in. So I'm going to take the texture, and what I'm really trying to do is come in here and boost these leaves and the ball and the foreground. So I'm going to do something like that and then click OK. But I don't want this happening all over. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and press the mask. So that's blocked everything out. Now I can go back to the white and paint it back in. And I'm just going to paint it in on the ball here. So this becomes much more sort of kind of drawing our attention. And then I'm also going to, I really like creating that little bit more contrast on the moss here. There's a lovely, I love that little green bit on the moss here and on this leaf. So this foreground then becomes really, this is now the bit that's grabbing our attention and going, this is where it's at. But we've also got that beautiful colours of the yellows and the browns in the background playing enough to know that this is what's being reflected in the ball. So again, if I just group those together, then what we can do is we can see we've gone from that was the picture you sent in. And when we saw the picture originally, you go, yes, that's a lovely photo. But by boosting it up to this is what's really going to grab the attention when you come to those crowd rating shots. Now, I would say that if this was going to be printed and put on your wall, this is overcooked. Right? I've kind of overdone it a little bit, partly to show you what can be done, but also because we're looking at the idea of it being on Guru Shots or Guru Shots style photo. I think if this was printed, you would kind of go, oh, just it does feel a little bit overcooked if you're going to spend too much time looking at it. But to move it from that to, you know, I mean, this here is more subtle. And probably what you could even do is we can take the opacity here and you could sort of nudge it to somewhere in between. I mean, something like that is potentially more of a printable level, and again, maybe play around with the levels a bit. But I think this, something like this, really kind of wallop them in the eye with that notion of the colours, the beautiful colours and the textures. And I think something like this would do really well on one of those crowd voting sites. So, hope that all makes sense to you there, Nadia. Lovely photo, and nice to be able to kind of come in and really see what I can enhance with that. Right, hope that all makes sense. Okay, so thank you then to Nadia, to Nurije and to April for sending in the images. I hope, and to everybody here who's been chatting away, leaving comments, I hope that all makes sense and gives you some ideas of ways you can play around. Right, where are we at? Any more comments? No, last comment I've got up is Susan saying hi VG, if there's any more since it's not appearing on here. So coming up then in the next few weeks, we have 2 more weeks in December, then the first week in January. And so the next 3 podcasts are going to be on the 22nd of December, we are going to have the After Dark Challenge. So that's next week. So make sure you get your pictures in next week for the After Dark Challenge. If you want some ideas, go and take a look at last week's podcast, episode 220, where I ran through ideas for the After Dark and the seasonal food challenges. Give you some ideas there. Okay, bear with me just one moment. I do just want to check one wee thing here. If I go to that and then that and okay, yes, what I thought, it wasn't showing up extra comments, so I've just gone somewhere else to sort of find. Okay, April says very creative shot. Susan says great shot, Nurije. Becca says all looks like a portal to the fairy. VG says autumn shot, beautiful colours, Nurije. Nadia says thank you, Kim. I like what you do to the background. Didn't think to do the lens blur on the background. Meg says wow, that's absolutely amazing. Okay, cool. Right. So where was it? So next couple of weeks then. Next week, the After Dark Challenge. Okay, so send me your images, either paste them into the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, put them in there, or send them to me, Kim at, okay, up there somewhere, Kim at kimayres.co.uk. Email me your image. Tell me a little bit about the image. So After Dark, what it is about, why you decided to do it, maybe any little interesting anecdotes about what happened when you tried to take it or what drew you to taking that photo. And then next week we'll take a look at all of the photos and see if we can inspire each other for what comes under that heading of After Dark. And Robert in Texas, if you happen to be out there in the fog and it's starting to get dark as well, loads of possibilities to play around with that, especially if you can find street lights or shop lights, any kind of lights which sort of fade and disappear into the fog. Excellent opportunities to play around with light and fog in the After Dark Challenge for that. So try and get me your images by Friday the 20th. Maybe Saturday the 21st is the absolute latest. And we will have fun then on next Sunday on the 22nd of December looking through the images. Following that then is on the 29th, so between Christmas and New Year, we will have the seasonal food challenge. So either try and play around with maybe on the run up, all sorts of seasonal food now, whether it's your mince pies or whatever. Or maybe if you want to take a photo of your actual Christmas dinner, there's a possibility if you want to get it edited in time for that. So again, for that one, Friday the 27th is where you're aiming to get me the image. Saturday the 28th is as late as you can go with that. Anything that turns up on a Sunday, generally speaking, I won't have time to process and stick into the podcast. So again, send me your image, tell me any little stories about it, why you took it, any strange things that happened or background to it is always kind of an extra bit of fun. And then the next thing then will be then following with first week in January, we're going to have our best of 2024. So start thinking about which photo is your best photo of the past year. Now that best comes under a couple of different categories. It might be the best because it's the one you're most proud of, because you feel you achieved something to create it. It might be your best because it sparks the best memories for you. It's not necessarily photographically the best, but you managed to capture something that you'd never had a chance to capture before, or you caught it in a way that was just wonderful, or some kind of unique event. Or it might be the best for you because you got the most accolades for it. It won particular prizes or competitions, or it's entirely up to you. But we are going to have a best of 2024 where you get to send me an image and tell me why you feel it's the best. But that will be the first week in January. Right, so that pretty much, yes, that does draw not what I'm wanting to do. What am I trying to press? I'm trying to press that one, right? So yes, thank you to everybody thank you to Nadia, to April and Nurije for sending in their images. Thank you to each of you for leaving your comments, saying hello, giving me feedback. And hopefully I'll see you all next week and you will have sent me your After Dark Challenge photos. Until then, enjoy yourself. Look forward to seeing you then. Take care. Bye-bye.